Welcome to Season 2, Episode 13 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm going to share some thoughts on where it's okay to cut corners as a teacher, especially if you're new. Visit truthforteachers.com, where you can read the blog post, get links to recommended resources, and share your thoughts on the show in the comments. Every couple of episodes, I like to answer a question that a listener has submitted to me. I call this the Ask Angela Anything segment. You can submit your own question by going to truthforteachers.com. Scroll down the page, and you'll see a SpeakPipe box. It says Start Recording. And when you hit that button, it will record your question for me. And you can do that anonymously if you want. I will then include it on a future episode of the show and record an answer for you. If you don't want your voice on the podcast, I also have a Google form available, and you can type your question in. The question that I'm answering today was one of the most blunt and honest questions that I think I've ever gotten. Where can a first-year teacher cut corners? This anonymous listener wrote this. Everyone knows that a first-year teacher is not going to perform at the same level as a 30-year veteran. I would like to be intentional about where I'm cutting corners so that my inexperience has the least impact on students. What areas do you think are most important for first-year teachers to focus on? How do I ask for guidance about where I can cut back without sounding like I'm incapable of doing my job? First of all, I commend this teacher for realizing that you will not be as good as a 30-year veteran in all likelihood, and you will need to cut corners. Recognizing this is one of the biggest hurdles that new teachers face because they internalize the pressure to do all the things and do them all perfectly. That is not possible. And you can't allow yourself to take on such a heavy burden, no matter what kind of pressure you're facing in your school. Mentally, I think you have to tell yourself, no, I am not going to expect myself to be an expert in every single area of curriculum and instruction and pedagogy and classroom management in the first few months of the job. I'm not taking that on. This is complex stuff that takes years to master, and I refuse to feel guilt or shame because I'm at the beginning of the process. Everyone started off where I'm at. I'm learning more every day, and that's all that I can ask of myself. I also think that it's wise to realize that the shortcuts should come from areas that have the least amount of impact on students. Your priority as a teacher should be the stuff that matters most for kids and their learning. And that can be challenging because often it's easiest to take shortcuts with kids. The kids are far less likely to call you out on what you're doing than your principal or their parents. Students often get our leftovers because the adults in our lives demand our time and energy in ways that are harder to ignore. As teachers, we all have moments where we are just scrambling around trying to find some busy work for students so that we can handle a paperwork or data request that was made at the last minute. We've all had moments where we assign something to keep students out of our hair while we finish lesson planning or grading papers or something else that we just weren't able to keep up with during non-instructional hours. Please don't think for a moment that this is not happening, at least occasionally, in every classroom across the country. And it creates tremendous guilt and frustration because we're spending our very limited time on things that don't have the biggest impact on kids. There's nothing we want more than to have dynamic, engaging lessons that are fully prepared in advance and then to be completely present and tuned into our students while we're teaching. And it's easy to get discouraged when that's not a reality 100% of the time. So you have to start by realizing it's not possible. Other teachers are not doing this 100% of the time. And you have to be prepared to cut corners. Let's start with lesson planning. You should not be doing all of your lesson planning alone. It's way too big and way too important of a job, especially for a new teacher, to try to take on by yourself. Co-plan with your team members whenever you possibly can. Buy ready-to-use activities from Teachers Pay Teachers or find them online. Even if you don't love your colleagues' lessons or the materials that you find on TBT are not a perfect fit with your teaching style and your students' needs, I think you're still better off utilizing those resources than staying up until 2 a.m. every single night trying to reinvent the wheel by yourself. I promise you, some other teacher has already figured out a way to teach the skill you need to teach in a way that's going to work for most of your students. And over time, you will learn what's best for your kids, and you'll be able to adapt the ideas that you find online really easily, really quickly. But that day is only going to come after you've had more teaching experience. So don't beat yourself up about not being in that place right now. Use pre-made activities and experiment with small adaptations until you can really make the lessons your own and create more of them yourself from scratch. Don't buy into this idea that's perpetuated in some education circles. I particularly hear this on Twitter. It drives me nuts. There's this insinuation that you're not a real teacher if you don't make all your lesson plans and activities yourself from scratch. There's some very outspoken people in education who seem to think that teachers are somehow cheating their students if they reuse lesson ideas from year to year and they don't make brand new activities for each group of kids they have. They pressure teachers to not only personalize all resources for their class, but to then spend their evenings and weekends online sharing everything they made with other educators. If you can do that, that's great. But I think it's putting way too much pressure on teachers to insinuate that they should be customizing every set of materials they use in their classrooms and that they shouldn't find or buy ready-to-use materials. Really high-quality resources don't require a lot of modifications, especially for a new teacher who's probably better off doing things the way that an experienced teacher says has worked best for them, rather than trying to carve out some brand new uncharted path for 5 or 6 lessons every single day. Now, you don't want to be teaching the same exact lessons the same way 5 years from now. And you always want to make sure that you're reflecting on what works and what doesn't, and adapting things for your kids' unique needs. But during those first few years in the classroom, or when you've moved to a new grade level, or when you're new to your subject area, it's perfectly fine to rely on what your coworkers or other teachers have created so that you can keep your head above water with all the other tasks that are on your plate. Find someone who is fantastic at teaching your grade level or your subject area and mooch off of them constantly. Seriously, if you are a first-year teacher, it is okay. Truly excellent teachers love to share what works in their classrooms. They enjoy mentoring teachers who are enthusiastic and willing to learn. It actually makes them feel bad when they find out that you were muddling your way through something unsuccessfully when they had everything that you needed the whole time and they just didn't realize you were struggling. So ask really outstanding colleagues that you admire for activities, forms, materials, anything you're lacking. You should feel no guilt about this. And when you hit your 3rd year of teaching, remember how needy you were and reach out to someone else who's brand new. You will have a tremendous amount of experience and wisdom to offer by your 3rd year in a grade level. Believe me. So the first strategy is to get help with lesson planning and use trusted teaching resources that other teachers have already vetted for you. Another good shortcut is to cut the cutesy. You don't have time right now to make things beautiful. If you make an activity yourself, leave it plain. You can improve it next year when you reteach the lesson. In the business world, people talk about the MVP, the minimum viable product. You know how a lot of new stuff comes out in a beta version? Or a company will release a product and then 3 days later, there's a whole bunch of updates to it? That's because they released the MVP. The company sent something out in the world that is far from perfect. They announced it's far from perfect. And then they learned from what happened as real people used the product, and they figured out how it needs to be improved. And in the meanwhile, they were able to keep moving forward instead of getting stuck on trying to get every single detail of an item exactly right before showing it to anyone. If you struggle with this, I want you to go back to Season 1 and Episode 15 of Truth for Teachers. Season 1, Ep 15. It's called How to Figure Out What's Good Enough and Be Satisfied with It. And in that episode, I explained the whole MVP process in detail and how to use a minimum viable product with your students so that over time, your lessons and activities and resources become amazing. Being okay with using the minimum viable product is a really important part of letting go of perfectionism as a teacher. When you're new, you can't afford to spend hours creating center materials and rearranging your file cabinet and leveling your classroom library. These are all worthwhile tasks, but they're not top priority. In Season 2, Episode 9, I explored that topic in more detail: how to prioritize tasks when everything seems urgent. You don't have to do everything in your first year. Go back, Season 2, Episode 9, and think about how to prioritize tasks. Remind yourself over and over when you feel like you're not measuring up, I don't have to do it all. I don't have to do it all right now. The most important part of knowing when you've done enough and where you can cut corners is being able to trust yourself. And that's tough as a new teacher because you feel like you don't know what you're doing and you can't trust yourself yet. Your judgment and your discernment as a teacher is still questionable. You don't have the experience to really make good decisions all the time. But you are the only person in the world who truly understands what it's like to be in your unique teaching situation and working with your group of kids. You know your classroom dynamics better than anyone else. And so with time, you will learn to trust that feeling in you that rises up and says, I can stop here. This is enough. I am enough. My value and worth as a teacher is not defined by what I do or how much I accomplish, but by who I am. And don't wait for someone in the school system to tell you that. You're probably not going to ever hear someone say, yep, fine to cut corners here. Go ahead, spend time with your family. Go rest up a bit. You are responsible for drawing your own boundaries around your time and figuring out how much energy you're going to expend on every task. You decide. You can't let guilt or comparison sway you from what you know is right deep in your heart, from what you know is enough. You can't let guilt or comparison cause you to sacrifice your health or your family. I want to leave you with a motivational quote for the week ahead that I call the takeaway truth. And this week's takeaway truth is from Edwin Bliss, who said, "The pursuit of excellence is gratifying and healthy. The pursuit of perfection is frustrating, neurotic, and a complete waste of time." Allow yourself to stop short of what is perfect and to cut corners where you need to in order to survive as a new teacher. Keep pursuing excellence and know that it's something you will achieve over time, not overnight. Have a fantastic week. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it. Truth for Teachers is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more great podcast recommendations, go to edupodcastnetwork.com. That's edupodcastnetwork.com.